All right, so Europeans are currently facing an absolutely unprecedented heat wave over the continent right now, which is obviously largely being driven by human-caused impacts on climate change, and we've already started to see some pretty catastrophic consequences as a result of this. So I wanted to get into some of the details here from the CNN breakdown, and then I'm going to show you guys a clip from one of the most right-wing networks in the United Kingdom, which was basically just doing their best impression of the Don't Look Up movie and putting their blinders on, pretending as if climate change is not something that we should be afraid of, but really something we should be celebrating because of the warmer temperatures. So anyways, let's go ahead and get into some of the details here from the CNN breakdown. They say extreme heat is baking a country woefully unprepared for the climate crisis. So part of what they're going to get into here is that in a lot of European countries, especially in the UK, their infrastructure is not built for extreme heat like this. It's actually built to keep heat into a lot of the buildings and homes that people are living in. So their infrastructure is definitely worse relative to the United States when it comes to being prepared for this type of a heat wave, but they're going to get into a little bit more details in this. They say heat waves across multiple continents have dashed records, threatened public health, and buckled infrastructure in what scientists say are signs of the climate crisis impact on day-to-day weather. And they say Americans are used to switching on their air conditioners anytime temperatures near 80 degrees Fahrenheit or 27 degrees Celsius for my UK bruvs in the channel. And they say, but in the UK, record-shredding heat this week has brought to life a pandemic-esque standstill. Temperatures in the UK breached 40 degrees Celsius, which is roughly 104 degrees Fahrenheit, for the first time on Tuesday, making it the country's hottest day on record throughout their entire history of record keeping. So you might look at this number, 104, and as an American be like, well, plenty of places around the United States have, 104 degree temperatures, and people seem to be able to manage it relatively okay. But again, you have the infrastructure problems in the United Kingdom where they're just straight up not prepared for this. You have, as they were pointing out there, you have rail systems or rail lines that are buckling under the heat. You have airports that are completely unusable because some of the materials that they are using on the runway is literally melting. So, obviously there's a lot of overlapping problems here, but they continue saying the connecting tissue between these heat waves is the influence of greenhouse gas emissions and the planet's ever-warming baseline temperature. And they say the UK Met Office's chief scientist Stephen Belcher was in a state of disbelief as he delivered a video statement about the shocking temperatures the country experienced on Tuesday, noting that they would have been virtually impossible in the UK in an undisrupted climate. So meaning if we had not allowed gigantic fossil fuel companies to lie to the world for decades and basically create a situation where we are actively destroying the planet right in front of our eyes and basically nothing is being done about it. We're going to touch on the current situation in the United States when it comes to addressing climate change here in a bit, but they continue with more details here saying that climate change driven by greenhouse gases have made these temperatures possible, and we're actually seeing that possibility now, he said, adding that if the world keeps emitting greenhouse gases at the level that it is now, such heat waves are likely to occur there every 3 years, so dramatic changes happening in a very short time period here. But they say 40 degrees Celsius may not be that hot to somebody sitting in central US, Australia, the Middle East, or in northern India. In the UK, it forced people to work from home and students to study remotely, and authorities told people not to take trains, which became dangerous on hot tracks that expand and bend in the heat. In other words, they're saying don't leave home because of how insanely hot it is outside. And they say in the UK, which is more likely to struggle with cold rather than hot, homes are too designed to keep heat in instead of keeping the heat out. And desk fans are selling out all over the country, but they only go so far, obviously. And they got another quote here saying the all-time temperature record for the UK has not just been broken, it has been absolutely obliterated, said Hannah Cloak, natural hazards researcher at the University of Reading. And she said the mark of 39 degrees Celsius will never even exist as a UK temperature record, because we have just soared past it into the 40s in a single sweaty leap. And they say so many fires ignited in London on Tuesday that the city's fire brigade declared a major incident and were stretched beyond their capacity. 4 people have drowned as people flocked to the beaches, rivers, and lakes just to try to get cool, and even a runway at an airport on London's outskirts had to be closed off as it melted in the heat. And they say in southern Europe, a region more accustomed to extreme heat, at least 1,100 people have died in the latest heat wave, and French firefighters are overwhelmed overwhelmed with blazes tearing through forests. 21 European nations are under heat-related warnings, and in terms of the American people, they say Americans may be more used to the heat, but heat waves are still getting longer and more frequent there too, which means more time indoors or wherever air conditioning may be, and no fewer than 100 million Americans, a full third of the country, were under heat alerts on Tuesday. So obviously, this is a global phenomenon. Different countries are going to have slightly different impacts as a result of how prepared they are for this type of thing. But at the end of the day, nobody is really prepared for the inevitable consequences that are going to come as a result of climate change. I mean, we in the United States or the UK, we have the resources, we have the capital to be able to make adjustments and adapt. But in terms of what the long-term consequences are going to be for the global community, for global stability, for the future of like mass crop failures and mass migration as certain parts of the world become straight up uninhabitable. I mean, we are just getting a tiny glimpse into what the future has to offer if we stay on the current track that we are right now. But of course, again, as I said, we're going to watch this UK news media broadcast here, where they're basically doing their best impression of Don't Look Up, the movie that was partially written by David Sirota, who does absolutely great journalistic work here in the United States. But I mean, this shit is, the equivalent, I guess, of the British version of like Newsmax or OANN News here in the United States. So, it's a pretty right-wing network, but still, the way that they go about talking about this climate change thing, I mean, it literally seems like it's like a parody of themselves. But let's just go ahead and watch this clip.
Sorry, are we not being clear? We're trying to tell you that the entire planet is about to be destroyed.
Okay. Well, it's, just something we do around here. We just keep the bad news light.
Oh, you see, John, you're outside enjoying the sunshine. It's not too hot, is it?
No, it's absolutely lovely. It's 20 degrees out here. It's perfect. But on a serious note, folks, by early next week, you can scrap 20 degrees. It could well be 40 degrees. I think there will be hundreds, if not thousands, of excess deaths early next week.
John.
The charts that I can see in front of me are frightening. So we all like nice weather, but this will not be nice weather. This will be potentially lethal weather for a couple of days. It'll be brief, but it'll be brutal.
Oh,
so,
John,
we can.
So, John, I want us to be happy about the weather and I don't know whether something's happened to meteorologists to make you all a little bit fatalistic and harbingers of doom. Because all of the broadcasts, particularly on the BBC, every time I've turned on anyone's talking about the weather, they're saying that there's going to be tons of fatalities. But haven't we always had hot weather, John? I mean, wasn't the summer of 76, that was as hot as this, wasn't it?
No. And, we are seeing more and more records, more and more frequently and more severely. Some people always hark back to the summer of 76, which was a freak event 40-odd years ago, over 40 years ago. But heat waves are becoming more extreme. This is yet another one which is coming down the tracks towards us. And, I don't think we should be too...
All right, so, I mean, Jesus fucking Christ. This is like supposedly a news media organization here that is literally just saying, well, I mean, I know that you just said that there's going to be potentially thousands of excess deaths as a direct result of these more frequent and more intense heat waves that we're seeing. And the response to that is basically just to say, well, we kind of want to keep it positive on here, right? We want to talk about how nice the weather is, right? We could go to the pool, we could go to the beach and have a good time, right? It's not that hot outside. Let's not worry about it. Let's not make any adjustments. Come on, this is just fear tactics being used by these crazy meteorologists using their science and data and predictions and whatnot. I mean, it's just a complete fucking joke. But, this isn't unique to even the UK. And I get that this is a very far-right media organization here. I don't know exactly how, the BBC and other outlets have been covering it. But just for a perspective in terms of how the American media has been covering this, and this is not, OANN or Newsmax here. This is ABC News. But I covered this on my channel a couple of days ago, where Bernie was doing this great takedown of Joe Manchin and his corruption and bad faith negotiations when it comes to climate legislation. And basically this ghoul here, I forget what her name is, but basically this mainstream media ghoul here was basically running defense for Joe Manchin in a knee-jerk reactionary way, and implying that he was acting in good faith and doing absolutely no journalistic investigation into the history of his rampant corruption throughout West Virginia and obviously within the United States Senate. So, I mean, this is the reality of what the media is right now. It is literally literally a perfect one-to-one parody of the Don't Look Up movie. If you haven't seen it, I recommend you go watch it. But nonetheless, I mean, it's like they're doing fucking parodies of themselves. They have no ability to actually just look at what the science, look at what the scientists are saying, look at what the data is saying, and then just use that as an objective benchmark in order to, formulate your commentary around that, or formulate your positions on the current status of the political debate in the United States around that. They just have no ability whatsoever to look beyond their partisan blinders, or be within whatever the confines of the U.S. government deems to be acceptable conversation. But again, this is something that is happening all across the world. It's not just in the UK, it's not just in the United States. And again, a lot of the consequences of climate change are disproportionately going to fall on the most vulnerable people around the world. It is going to fall disproportionately on some of the poorest countries around the world, which have been intentionally kept impoverished by large empires like the former British Empire and the current United States Empire, as we loot their resources and exploit their labor forces. And these countries that we have exploited for literally centuries at this point are then going to be facing the brunt of the man-made climate change that we are largely responsible for. So that's the reality of what we're facing right now. Again, I don't think anybody has really fully grasped what it's going to look like when you have mass migration. I mean, you want to talk about a border crisis right now and how hysterical conservatives get in the United States with the amount of people coming to the U.S. border down with Mexico. But I mean, think about what that's going to look like in 10 years when massive portions of Latin America are forced out of their homes because it's unlivable, or because there's massive famines and crop failures and all of these various consequences that we can't even envision. I mean, we're really just getting started here, and still, the media refuses to accurately portray or acknowledge what is happening right in front of our eyes. But again, this is a global phenomenon, and if you look at the data in terms of the global progression of some of the record-breaking temperatures that we have been seeing recently, they say the last 8 years have been the hottest on record. Okay, the last 8 years, 8 out of the last 10 years on the planet have been the hottest throughout recorded history. Okay, so this is not something that is just an aberration. It's not something that, as conservatives love to say, the Earth, changes temperatures all the time. It ebbs and it flows, and there's waves of it throughout history. No, not when we have organized civilization with millions and billions of people living on coastal lands, living in huge metropolitan areas, and requiring the types of resource production and food production that we have right now. We have never been in a situation where there has been this dramatic of a temperature escalation without having a potential for human civilization for collapse. I mean, there's no historical comparison to what is happening right now, given the state of the current world that we are living in. But nothing is still being done about this. I mean, I talked about this in my video the other day. We had corrupt ghoul from West Virginia, Joe Manchin, a literal millionaire coal baron, coming out and officially tanking Democrats' last chance, really, to actually invest in climate change. And this was supposed to be tied, if you guys remember the original story they were trying to sell us when they split up Build Back Better and the bipartisan infrastructure framework. They were trying to tell us, past the bipartisan infrastructure framework, then we'll get to the climate investments later down the line. Of course, they were bullshitting, they were lying, and we're left with a situation where we passed the bipartisan infrastructure framework, which was pathetic, watered down, half-assed, whatever terms you want to use to call it, but we passed the bipartisan infrastructure framework, and this was a straight up net negative on climate. It's actively making climate change worse with this type of bill, and then with Manchin tanking the prospects of climate investments, then you're even plunging us further into the abyss. Not to mention that we now have even higher record levels of military funding, the U.S. military being one of, if not the single biggest polluters on the planet. So we have that, and then we also have the right-wing reactionary corporate-owned Supreme Court that we have in place right now that ruled on something like West Virginia versus the EPA, basically saying that the Environmental Protection Agency doesn't have the authority to actually regulate and enforce regulations on greenhouse gases. So, I mean, this is a situation we have right now. We have a global capitalist elite class that is using the extraction of resources, using the profits that they are making off of fossil fuels in order to make themselves filthy rich at the expense of the entire planet. And again, at the end of the day, these people that are making these billions right now, they are going to be protected. They're going to be safe. jetting off in their private jets and sailing off in their yachts and whatnot. But the consequences of climate change are disproportionately going to fall on the most vulnerable people within the United States and around the world. So, if we actually want to confront this system, we have to not only make investments in climate change, and I don't mean, the Joe Biden half-assed and neoliberal market-oriented investments in climate change. I mean real restructuring, bottom-up, tackling the authoritarian structure of the capitalist system, dismantling these fossil fuel companies, nationalizing our energy system, and making dramatic Green New Deal level investments in renewable energy for the future. And oh, by the way, creating millions of good-paying, sustainable jobs for the future in the process of doing so. So, we have massive steps that we have to take. But right now, the current political situation here in the United States, as well as around the world, is that we are going to stay on this current trajectory, and we're going to continue to see these massive heat waves. We're going to continue to see impacts on food production, on regular production of other commodities as well. And we're going to see absolutely catastrophic humanitarian consequences. But also, even if you are a conservative capitalist, we're going to see absolutely unimaginable consequences in the economic realm. I mean, we're talking about trillions and trillions of dollars in damage due to these excess weather events, due to the increased severity and frequency of these mass weather events. Not only the cost in destructive terms, but also the loss in potential investments in renewable energy. So, we're talking about consequences all across the board right now. But unfortunately, we have a situation where, in the most powerful country in the history of the planet, here in the United States, where we have the resources to completely change the orientation of how our global energy system is working, we instead have a government that is completely bought and controlled by the fossil fuel industry that is profiting off of the destruction of the planet.